There he
I
is.
I don't know, Dave. Why don't you tell me? um,
Great.
yeah. Uh, there's Craig again.
My friends, what lays before you is the myriad knowledge of an unfathomable universe. Join our intrepid remembrancers as they explore the heresy as history. From deep within the farthest reaches of the great library of Tiska, we are the Heresy Grad School. So said the War Master in his wisdom. Go forth, my sons, and illuminate them.
Well, welcome back, listeners, to another episode of Heresy Grad School, where we cover heresy as history and update you on all awesome things. So I think we're starting off with just a little bit of housekeeping. Dave, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I will. Just give me 1 second here.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so definitely. This is going to go back into the very first episode of Heresy Grad School that we did for the Xana incursion. So going back and cleaning up something that I should have mentioned in episode 1, but it actually fits really nicely into where we're going in episode 3, or I should say lesson 3, right? So we're going to cover today page 62 to 64, the feathered messenger to false war. But before we get into all that, the road to Xana's sort of sedition, the road to Xana's secession was sort of long and convoluted. And it wasn't until about 008 M31 that really there was a definite sort of military action that marked them out for censure. And this was the Gilder's Grave raid on the mining world of Gilder's Grave. And so this raid on the mining world comprised of both an attack on a trader fleet in orbit and then the complete annihilation and destruction of a loyalist force on the surface of this mining world. And what's really cool about that is it sort of marks Xana out as neither in the War Master's camp or, right on the side of the Emperor. So they're still sort of their own, they're trying to be their own sovereign forge, right? They're trying to carve out their own empire amidst the growing galactic civil war. But this Gilder's Grave incident, which was, if you go back to page 56, sort of last paragraph there, we talked about it. But what I forgot to talk about was on page 76 and 77, we have the Knight Atropos from House Malanax. And it's so cool because it's the first time we've seen House Malanax. And it's the first time we've seen a Knight Atropos. So this Atropos on page 76 is Matanari, which in kanji or Japanese, feudal Japanese, means adjacent. So I'm assuming that this knight would have been, right next to you before you could do anything, and then just cuts you with its, multitude of weaponry. But it says here on page 76, the Mechanicum Knight Atropos Matanari, pick capture identified, the assault on Gilder's Grave, leading element of attacking Knight detachment, sub-engagement, the raid on the Yellow Atoll suborbital transit depot in 008 M31. So this would have been after they broke through the trader fleet in orbit, and they went down to the surface of Gilder's Grave to the Yellow Atoll or potentially the suborbital transit depot. Not really sure where that would have been, but it would have been a loyalist stronghold. And then on page 77, it goes on to say, the raid on the world of Gilder's Grave is the first known example of the Xanite Mechanicum forces conducting an aggressive military operation to their own ends, engaging both traitor and loyalist auxiliary forces in open battle in order to achieve their aims of looting the mining world of its resources and heavy machinery. The vanguard of the Xanite forces during this attack were several maniples of Mechanicum Knights, at least 2 of which have been identified as belonging to the sinister House Malanax. This was a force which the defenders of Gilder's Grave could not hope to match in firepower or resilience, resulting in a complete massacre of local forces. So that's really cool, guys. I just wanted to clean that up because it's been bugging me, and every time I go past this page, I'm just like, oh man, got to go back and talk about House Malanax. And we'll talk about House Malanax a little bit more later on in our coverage of the Xana incursion. But right now, that's where we should be. So housekeeping done on my end.
All right. I guess let's get on into it then. Do. Intro goes right here. Patrick, remember. Yay.
Okay.
All right, Dave.
All right, guys. So getting into it. Last time we spent a lot of the lesson on, finding out where Xana really was, right? The far western reaches of the Segmentum Pacificus, right on that intergalactic void, and how they were located during the Great Crusade, and then sort of the Great Crusade itself, right, which was very much an enemy without unifying theme. So the Great Crusade itself is kind of about the enemy without, right? The Xenos, the existential threat to the nascent Imperium and the human species. And so we talked about the Frawl, we talked about the Rangda. Xana played a huge part in both of those compliance and xenocides. But now we're going to talk about the enemy within. And so the Great Crusade, was the enemy without, but the Horus Heresy is all about the enemy within, right? It's the, the traitor in your midst, the betrayal of a brother. And so this is so perfect for where we're going with Xana, because everything that we talk about from here on out, guys, is going to be cloaked in shadow and intrigue, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit about this, but I want to tee it up, because if you read it straight through, there's sort of it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, right? It's hard to kind of go back and link all the pieces together. So what I'm going to do now is a little bit of a spoiler, but on page 66, I'm going to read a call-out box called Fragments and Suppositions. And what this is it's how we know the things we know about the Xana incursion. And it's the unreliable narrator. It's the unreliable testimony and everything else. And this is the story of the Horus Heresy, right? This is the unreliable narrator. This is just the secrets that lie still in the shadow. So without further ado, Fragments and Suppositions. Much of what is known to the record about the incident known as the Xana incursion is a dossier assembled from the diverse and incomplete secondary sources. These include the Akashic archives of the Amphion, recovered from her hulk after the Battle of Triton, the harvested data looms of the Xanan exile Savant, Mortififa, Turul, and the apocryphal appendix to the Tears of the Gorgon, an allegorical and now prohibited treatise associated with the redacted chapter of the Third Founding. The primary source file of the operation, held within the seal and office of the Sigillite and the Divisio Sicari, were lost during the devastation of the Siege of Terra. It is also certain that during the duration of the Wars of the Heresy, the operation was itself kept secret by the orders of the Sigillite, even from Imperial High Command. As such, while there is good evidence to suggest that the real traitor embassy had somehow been compromised, intercepted, and replaced by covert Imperial forces, so that cannot be contested, it's also highly likely that the individual masquerading as Roxol Corridon was in fact Endrid Har, an outcast not from the Sons of Horus, but the World Eaters Legion, who remained loyal, but for the provenance of at least 1,000 Legionis Astartes accompanying him remains a matter for some conjecture. So, in general consensus, it was this force undertaking what was in effect to be a suicide mission with little hope of recovery or rescue, even if success was achieved. It was Endrid Har and his loyalist forces that, through just sheer grit and determination, wanted redemption in death and were willing to go to any ends to achieve it. So just how Endrid Har survived, which he did, because we know he was present in the later Solar War, also remains unknown at this point. Of equal enigma is the depth of the Dark Angel's involvement, but perhaps most unknowable and disquieting in regards to the Xana incursion is the horror which erupted on Xana 2 after the Archimagos and the attack of the Dark Sovereign. So that is where we're going, guys. And that's sort of how we know what we know about the Xana incursion.
The Xana incursion. Death has reared himself a throne in a strange city lying alone. Hell, rising from 1,000 thrones, shall do it reverence. Unknown poetic fragments collected in the Lexis Dramaturgica, circa M2. Part 3. Flashpoint to False War.
And at this point, I'll turn it over to Jason for the Feathered Serpent.
Thank you, Dave, for that lovely setup. So, guys, kicking off here with the Feathered Messenger on page 62, if you're following along with us. The start here kind of outlines some of the very interesting, almost like bureaucratic details. Because like Dave was mentioning, Xana starts off, the whole Xana engagement starts off as kind of almost like a Cold War between the back and forth between, more obviously Dorn and Malkador kind of, coming in behind him like a jetpack parent and helping to sweep up the problems, and Horus on the other side. So, we talked last time about how they were both trying to nudge Xana in the direction of an alliance. Much like a pair of dog parents trying to figure out, which parent the dog likes better. And here, Xana really has the pick of what it wants to do, because it's this massive forge world with an incredible output that everybody wants a piece of. And to start off here, the Feathered Messenger speaks specifically to this interesting path that Horus takes. And he doesn't send a priest of Mars. You might think he would send somebody like Regulus, like he did to Kelbor Hal, but he goes a different direction. This time he sends a guy named Unvakar Noon. He's actually one of the lodge priests of Davin, and he's described as an individual bedecked in strange feathered raiments and the bones of the dead. And this guy comes and offers the Lords of Xana more than just like the same goofy threats from Dorn and Malkador. And he offers sort of the same thing he does to Kelbar Hall, in unshipping the vaults of Moravec. Here, just like some of the other like large trader forge worlds we've talked about, Sarum, Cyclothraith, these forge worlds that are kind of large and they want their independence from Mars. And this is probably why, in part, Horus's gambit with the Mechanicum doesn't sync up as well as it should, because while something like 2/3 of Mars has declared for Horus, and he has these massive forge worlds like Xana, Sarum, Cyclothraith, these renegade forge worlds are kind of distrustful of Mars, even though the majority of Mars is also for the War Master. So, just like up until this point he's done with Mars and some of these other Forge worlds, the War Master sends these promises of not just building their empires larger, but also this freedom of experimentation out from under the Treaty of Olympus. So he sends this guy, Unvikar Noon, to inform the Vodian consistory that they will find like their even though way out on the edge here, they're still ostensibly shackled to, the Treaty of Olympus and what Mars wants them to do. But Noon tells them that under the new Imperium, they will no longer be used and bled dry by an emperor who cares nothing for their power or their prosperity. Under Horus, they would flourish and be rewarded for their service. So completely out of the gate, they're going to be done with restrictions of the Emperor's technological edicts, played off as something to keep them in line, to make sure they're not a challenge to the burgeoning Imperium. Now, ostensibly, these were put in place to avert, old night rolling around again. But if that's the real reason, it's kind of up to debate. So that's completely gone. The machine cult dogma, as long as they constantly supply war machines and weapons to the traders. Now, what's interesting here is the Vodian consistory and the controlling archmagos of Xana are in secret, while dealing with Horus, still speaking with Malkador's emissaries to see what else they can kind of weasel out of them, which is kind of entertaining in the end. But speaking of feathered messengers, Pat, I believe you had something interesting to tell us about this guy.
Yeah, so let's take a second and kind of just break down essentially just the sentence that describes Unvikar Noon, where they describe him as, an individual bedecked in a strange feathered raiment and the bones of the dead. That is very reminiscent to if you guys remember when we were talking about the Corona Deeps, Horus sent an emissary or Davenite priest from the Raven Lodge to go out and indoctrinate the Rakandor, which was a rogue night house that then became House Earthane, and their livery now is essentially of ravens. And so it made me think, feathers, ravens, maybe we'll see more and more in the Black Books, Horus using lodge priests, and maybe even specifically the Raven Lodge as emissaries and embassies. It's just kind of interesting how this book plays so well with some of that Corona Deep coverage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just remembering back to Deeps, and I think, Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't like a version of Regulus, or maybe it was Regulus himself, wasn't he sent to Mazella? Didn't they they smoked him? Yeah.
They threatened to, because he was met by a Mesoan battle sphere, which I think we posited was a tiny non-copyright infringing Death Star.
Yeah. So maybe they learned from that, or maybe the War Master learned from that. Maybe he was like, don't send Regulus to negotiate for Forge Worlds. I don't know.
Send something more fleshy.
It's a possibility he has a bad rep by this point.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't the whole stipulation that he essentially is just copied over and over and over again? He just has tons and tons of bodies.
That's one of the prevailing theories.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe. Well, I mean, so the Davenite Lodge priests, the majority of them are latent psychers. So there could also be the part of, hey, maybe we send a psyker who might be able to have the ability to manipulate somebody's mind into joining our side. And also, a simple human form is a lot less threatening than a fully augmented human,
Yeah, but to who? I mean, he's meeting a council of archmagi.
I mean, if, say, Horus for some reason sent, Abaddon, I'm sure they'd still cower a little bit with transhuman fear, but,
I mean, would they? My archmagi certainly don't cower to any sort of Astartes.
I mean,
Mechanicum are here to put the fear of mechanical god into Astartes. Admittedly, it doesn't work out all that well in the fluff occasionally, but
yeah, I'm not
it's
quite
neither
sure
here nor
why
there.
Astartes went out so many times.
It's because they're the poster kids.
Of course they are.
But,
Everybody loves to play Space Marines. Yeah.
all right, so let's get back to what's going on with Xana and not Regulus. So, down here towards the bottom of page 62, we're looking at Flashpoint. So, we're looking at the... Oh, I just realized there's a tiny typo here. It says at the closing divisions of 009 M21, which would be way in the past. I think they mean M31. The bargain between Xana and the War Master's proxy was in its final stages of conclusion. So, the Xana has promised basically billions of tons of war material as part of their sort of fealty to Horus. Now, what sets them apart from every other Forge World, including Mars up until this point, is the gift that they send out of the gate is like their first show of loyalty to Horus. They send him 3 separate Ordinatus Minoris siege engines. Now, any Mechanicum player is well familiar with these things. They are hilarious. They will knock huge swaths in an enemy army, and you need to play crazy numbers of points. It's something like, I want to say 4,500 or so, probably more.
It's
probably
at
around
least
5,000.
4,500, but yeah,
For
and
an
it's also a great
Olator.
way to lose friends.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're playing 5,000 point games, I mean, it's kind of no holds barred.
I mean,
But,
yeah.
So, the Vodian Consistory gifts Horus with 3 of these things, and they're said to specifically dwarf the firepower of even the mighty Diamantine siege engines that had fallen into the grasp of the Iron Warriors or earlier in the Horus Heresy. Now, if you guys remember those things, they were a gift from Lionel Johnson to Perturabo, which is this whole other entertaining rabbit hole of why the Lion would ever trust Pert. But, so, 3 of these guys, named Mithrax, Nepenthax, and Asherax after Terran deities long dead of worship. Now, when describing the Ordinatus classification engines, at the top here under Ulator, they describe how they're city burners and fortress breakers without compare. And something I want to draw attention to, it says they're armed with a Magna Beam Lance, Matter Cyclone, or Rad Conflagrator. Now, if you check out the Ordinatus Minoris rules, Magna Beam Lance, probably the Bellicosa cannon that you get on the Sagittarius, I want to say. And then Matter Cyclone is probably the sonic weapon on the Ulator. However, we do not have anything that can be considered a rad conflagrator, which honestly sounds like a giant version of an IRAD engine, which is possibly, well, now that graviton imploders have different rules, the thing that Space Marines most fear from a Mechanicum army. So, what, guys, what do you think? What is a rad conflagrator? Is it like a giant Titan-sized rad engine? Because that would be spectacular.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be. I almost imagine. What's the. Like, I can only imagine it has its own even like flame template, because the small rad engines actually have flame templates, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, they're 12-inch torrents.
I imagine something very similar to the or to the Malcador Infernus, but like on steroids and pumped up to 12.
Right? Like a Hellstorm template, but like bigger somehow?
Yeah. Like you have to play long ways on a board. You can't, otherwise it just doesn't work, is how I figure it.
It was like 3 Hellstorm templates.
Yeah.
And you had to flip them like you did with a barrage weapon. That would be hilarious.
Yeah, jeez. That alone would be horrifying, especially for really big games.
Right? Astartes need to fear a mechanical god.
Yeah. God. Ugh.
It's good stuff. So, anywho, less wild speculation, more me reciting history here. So, what's interesting too is this is different. None of the other Forge Worlds so far, including Mars, has pledged an Ordinatus engine to Horus. So it's seen as something almost like an underhanded barb almost towards Kelbor Hal, who still has his few Ordinatus like very firmly under Mechanicum control. And so possibly this is Xana trying to start out and almost become Mars' rival in the traders, not just yet another kind of subordinate bunch of Mechanicum. So, to talk a fun extra bit about that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. This is, again, another example. Black books really do sort of talk to each other, talk back and forth within itself, right? So if you go to page 80, you have this beautiful 2-page spread of the Ordinatus Minoris Ulator Asherax. So this is one of the 3 Ordinatus Ulator pattern that were on Xana. This is Asherax. And I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I'm going to say that the records that survived the heresy and sort of give us, a little bit of context into what the Ulator was, suggests that it's this Ulator, specifically the Asherax, is built around a colossal sonic destructor. So this is sort of your classic directional sonic transduction generator. I think when most people put the model down on the table, this is what they're putting down, right? This is what they're playing. And really does massive amounts of damage to combatants as well as armor. So what this does is it generates a hyper-destructive wave pulse that resonates with the force equal to the mass of the object struck. So it's really just sort of pulling those individual molecules apart, right? Just this through sonic wave pulse is just sort of deconstructing this at the atomic level. And it's fucking devastating, man. This will destroy super heavy tanks just as easily as Legionis Astartes. just as easily as, your humble infantryman, Imperial Auxilia. So this weapon rivaled the destructive power of the Titans of the Legio Titanicus, the God Engines. And really, Xana was one of the few forges that could produce this relic of sort of old knight. It's sort of one of these basic weapons mounted on a tractor unit. I don't know why we've never seen one of these on a Titan, because man, that would just be so cool. But yeah, it's I guess maybe it's too big to be mounted on anything less than maybe an Imperator class Titan. I don't know. But this is the Ordinatus Minoris Asherax, and I'm going to stop there because I don't want to spoil what's to come. Jason, Pat, back to you guys.
All right. Well, checking out a little bit deeper towards the emissary of the uncrowned king. So, I appreciate the War Master here does not trust everything in this alliance with Xana to a single priest of Davin. So he actually sends along one of his own warlords. He is a chieftain of the Catalan Reavers named Raxel Corridon. And Corridon has kind of made a name for himself in the Sons of Horus from Istvan III. First there, and then into the Drop Site Massacre, and leading more than 20 dark compliance actions as Horus is rolling back across, taking things that he formerly, brought into compliance for the Emperor. So Corridon here has made a ton of these dark compliance actions towards the northern reaches of the Segmentum Obscurus. Now, he is definitely known as a favorite of Horus, and he's known as this vicious, prideful, warlord who has just an incredible amount of experience here. And it's really kind of the, iron fist to the contrast of the less threatening Davinite Lodge Priest. So sending him there is definitely a threat behind the, easier to deal with Lodge Priest. Now, two, it's something starting out. Roxel Corridon's Grand Cruiser that he shows up in the Xana system is itself, too, a show of power. If you guys remember back to our Coronid Deeps coverage, there's a Gurian-class Grand Cruiser called the Cicatrix Tyrannus. Now, this was taken as a prize by the traders during the Battle of Port Maw. She used to be a fleet defense vessel for Port Maw, and where she was once white and golden, now her hull is scorched black and pitted by the fires of untold void battles since her fall from grace. So the Cicatrix comes with this large escorting squadron of frigates, 8 of them, and 4 Isos-class fleet tenders. Now, these are small, warp-capable vessels that are armed, but they're really designed to ferry supplies to warships in frontline service, rearmor, things like that. But as part of the War Master's opening gift to Xana, within these ships are hundreds and hundreds of these armored cargo pods, and within those are wreckage from Istvan, Momid, and Autosrat, and other battlefields where the Sons of Horus had fought other Legiones Astartes and had achieved victory. So in these containers were fallen Astartes from those legions that the Sons of Horus had fought and beaten, along with tons of tanks, war machines, arms, and armor from these different loyalist legions. And all of this isn't just junk to the Mechanicum. It's not just corpses, it's technology and genecraft and an insight into the development of other forges and even of the empire, the Emperor's plan to create Space Marines in the first place. And it's just this treasure trove of lore and techno arcana for them. And because now they are completely out from under the writ of Mars, and by that, under the writ of the Emperor as well, it's a whole bunch of stuff that the Lords of Xana can now dip into without restraint. And speaking of that, back over to Dave for some more fun stuff.
Yeah, so we're talking about here the gift, right? So this is the traditional sealing of a pact, right? This is how do the emissaries like seal this bargain? And it's on the one hand, the tribute of Xana is going to be in these, relics of old night, these STC constructs, these macro engines of devastation. And so they're really irreplaceable. And then on the other hand, right, the War Master, right, in air quotes, right, the War Master, because remember what I read at the very beginning of this. So, is bringing the remains of Istvan, and the Drop Site Massacre, and all these other battlefields. And so this sort of corpse field of what Jason said, right? Genecraft and Techno Arcana. But, for the sort of the tech priests of Xana, who are already a little wayward, right? They're already a little off the reservation. This is a treasure trove in terms of technology, as well as potential gene craft and lore. So just keep in mind, guys, that all of these things are conspiring together at sort of a critical juncture, and I think we're going to see sort of some of the improbability that's to come. But that's all I've got right now. Pat, do you have anything?
No, I mean, I think you basically covered it. I mean, Horus is essentially like, hey, I hear you guys like scrap. Here's some scrap. I mean, that's a very childish way to put it, but like Jason was pointing out, like Horus is saying, hey, there's no more leash. All I need is your help. And I mean, the naive part of my brain wants to say he's extending a hand of friendship when really he wants to control them. But the way he's going about talking to them, it probably makes them, pushes them to Horus more, because he's saying, with me, you can do everything. And then of course the Sigilite and Dorn are on the other side saying, hey, stop doing that shit. Remember your oaths. You don't get to do any cool things. No dessert for you after dinner because you didn't eat your vegetables.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think what Xana's not, they're not naive, right? I think what they've seen what the Imperium has during the Great Crusade, right? Which was 100 years of bleeding war stock and material into the void against the Xeno species. And, for the Voidian consistory, the ruling, sort of tech priesthood of Xana, maybe they were in it for the long game. Maybe they were like, okay, we're willing to side with this crusade that's going to dominate the stars, that's going to dominate the galaxy, because the long game is eventually this will all be over. We'll recoup our losses, and we'll have sort of unfettered access to trading partners, material extraction, resources, throughout the galaxy. But none of that comes to pass. The whole dream falls apart. The dream of the Imperium, the dream of the Imperial truth, it falls apart. And at this point, I think the Voidian Consistory, just like anybody else, right, would see that maybe it's better to go it alone. Maybe if we can just figure out how to break off and play these two sides against each other, maybe that's the way to go. And sort of worked for Zhao Arcad, maybe not totally, but worked a little bit for Zhao Arcad.
They gave it a good try.
But all is not to be, right? So Dorn's wrath is coming. Malcador's wrath is coming, and so let's get into that.
Ugh, this dick. All right, let's talk about Dorn.
I am dick.
Contractually obligated at this point to talk about Dorn. So, very appropriately, this section is called Unwelcome Guests. So, the Cicatrix Tyrannus is incoming. They're entering close orbit of Xana 1 on final approach to the Forge World. So, big problems. The Auspex grid of the outer planetary system comes alive. Crazy alarm signals, emergency deals going off, very close to the gravity shadow of the system's inner sphere. Dump a whole bunch of capital ships, 5 altogether, Imperial in origin and Loyalist in allegiance. So, heading up is a Gloriana-class battleship called the Amphion. And if you want to go track that down, I'll shed a little light on this. So, this, along with these 4 other capital ships and tons of smaller escort craft, and maybe a dozen large transport craft, this really marks that Dorn has, taken it upon himself to cast judgment where he's not wanted or cared about, and that this is a vital part of Terra's actual defense fleet that Dorn has decided is worth the reward of destroying Xana if he cannot bring it over. He would rather destroy it than he would, allow it to be turned over to Horus. However, if you'll remember, at the same time, Dorn is also telling the fake fabricator general, Zagreus Kane, that Mars is not worth attacking because it would take too many Legion resources. So, I'm kind of feeling like Dorn is making this up as he goes along, and as long as he's confident that nobody will call him on his dumb mistakes. But Dorn's big goofy fleet does not sail in unopposed because massive Forge worlds like this are never undefended. So Xana is rising up. Squadrons of frigate-sized machine hunter killers and scores of autonomous weapon platforms that don't need to be manned by anything are starting to rise from Xana 1's atmosphere. Hundreds and hundreds of void torpedoes are fired from these platforms, with the hunter-killer ships behind them. Xana itself has plenty of warships, like massive Mechanicum battle arcs and attack carriers, much larger than defense vessels are normally, are there to intercept the Loyalist assault force. And what's entertaining is, despite the bravery and skill of the Loyalist navigators who dropped the force into real space close enough to be hours rather than days from their intended target, are still able to contest the attack before it reached its goal, or at the least close a lethal trap behind the intruders. So, a second entertaining bit here. Secondary waves of munitions roar forth from the surface of the Forge world of Xana 2 itself, and its sentinel void battle servitors, giant mechanical kraken the size of strike cruisers, break from their steel shells like hollow moons and power towards the fray. So, Xana has this massive fleet all on its own before you even start to factor in the forces around Horus that he's brought with Corridon and the Cicatrix Tyrannus. So it's a possibility that Dorn has made yet another mistake here. And
Can we just take a second and just marinate on mechanical kraken the size of strike cruisers?
yeah, so what that makes me think of, I'm sure the crossover between people that listen to our podcast and people that have played Mass Effect is pretty steep. Kind of like the Reapers from Mass Effect.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's what I envision when I hear like mechanical space kraken the size of strike cruisers. But this is not a Forge world you fuck with.
Yeah, most definitely.
So that is it for me, guys.
No, that's so good, and I think it just makes me realize that the Xana incursion, more than anything else, just cloaked in so much shadow and conspiracy that I'm not even sure if Dorn. I mean, I know we all like to hate on Dorn. I don't really like to hate on Dorn. I don't think he's that bad. You know, I think he's like sort of doing his job. He's just not that interesting. But you know, he's just sort of like, it's just what it's sort of who he is. You know, he's like doing his job. Like he wouldn't be the worst guy in the world if he was like if he was like your neighborhood, you know, police officer, right?
He
Like
absolutely would.
Nah, you would know what you were getting, man.
He would be the guy that like breaks up every party on a noise complaint.
He'd be the worst resident for an HOA. Is essentially
absolute worst.
Not saying any of the Primarchs would be good for an HOA. God, think of an HOA made up of Primarchs.
But can you imagine what sort of dickhead Dorn would be if he were in charge of an HOA?
Okay. All right. So, sorry, too much of a rabbit hole.
so no, it's my fault. So and I'm not even sure that Dorn knows really what's going on, because if you look at it, to this point, there are no Legionis Astartes involved in this sort of punitive expedition to Xana, right? You have a Gloriana class battleship, but it's not crewed by Space Marines. It's crewed by Solar Auxilia. And from everything we can tell so far, a slice of the Segmentum Solar's solar fleet. So, I mean, we're still early days. We know that Horus is coming, but I don't think he's gotten to the first sphere yet. I don't think he's inside the ring of Pluto and Neptune. So, you know, certainly Dorn approved this, at least this strike attack, but I'm not sure how much else he knows is going on. So that will be very interesting to sort of get into. And I don't know if we should go there yet. I don't know if we're ready to go into all the various miscalculations, the Archimagos of Xana, but you got to think, right? There's just got to be this little sliver of your split consciousness, your tactical, partition that if a loyalist punitive strike force shows up at exactly the same time as the traitor delegation, like somebody's got some pretty fucking good intel, right? But that just never crosses the minds of the tech priests of Xana. They're just like, they run the calculations. They're like, no, we have enough orbital defenses. We have enough, ground-based bombardment. We have enough these space kraken that we'll just take care of it. Don't worry about it. Horus, don't worry about it. We've got this covered, right? So that's sort of where we are right now. I think that's very interesting. I think that's sort of very interesting and very telling of the hubris that can sort of befall the Mechanicum. So I don't know.
Well, you did mention one thing that I heartily agree with. Dorn doesn't really know what's going on at this point, but that doesn't stop him from hurling a Gloriana class. I mean, there are like 20 of these in the Imperium, right?
Yeah.
And he's just cramming one. Like, he won't go and take back Mars because supply and demand, Fabricator General. Perhaps you've heard of it. Like the dumbest ass line in an otherwise terrific novella. But he'll send an Amphion, the Amphion, across to what we've firmly established is like the galactic boonies in order to blow up Xana. This makes no sense, and Dorn's plans are stupid.
It's a really great point. It's a really great point. And I think in sort of the novel or the novella, it was a Cybernetica, right?
Cybernetica.
Yep.
Dorn sort of disapproves of a full-on. He was basically going to exterminatus Mars, right? But he does approve of a small clandestine strike force inserting itself into Mars. By small, I mean one guy.
He did want to exterminatus Mars, and then Malkador brought up the point of, well, 2/3 of Mars has already turned for Horus. If you want to make sure every single other Forge world in the galaxy turns to Horus, go ahead and exterminatus Mars, because you're basically wiping out the mecca of the Mechanicum's religion.
Yeah, that's a great point, man. And I think, maybe we see some echoes of that here. I mean, Malkador, for all of his sort of failings, right? The Council of Nicaea being the biggest of them, but he's not dumb, and so he definitely sort of understands espionage, and he understands clandestine warfare, and he understands, needing to be able to. Because at this point, and we talked about this in the previous episodes, this is not a war of attrition that the loyalist forces can win. Not right now, right? So they've got to delay. They have to deny war stock. They've got to deny materiel. They've got to slow that spearhead decapitation strike down, right? They've got to slow down the War Master who just wants to drive directly to the throne world, right? And challenge the Emperor. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, look, man, I'm not going to say Dorn's this genius because I don't think he is. But yeah, I mean, somehow Malkador convinced him, or if not, then Malkador's got some sneaky ways of, suborning a Gloriana class battleship and being like, yeah, man, need you to go on a little secret mission for me.
I mean, Dorn is essentially the war master of the loyalists, so I mean, it would make sense that he had the ability to call it, but yeah, it's overkill.
In the other direction, this is at least twice now, probably more if we went back a little and we're specifically looking for it. But this is twice, very obviously, that Malkador has had to come in behind Dorn and kind of clean up after his like chest beating and grandstanding. Because starting out with this, Dorn came in all hot and bothered, yelling about destroying Xana if they didn't come over. Malkador had to send in, some agents to be like, hey, like I know that was a whole bunch of loud shit talking, but like, you don't want any of this stuff to happen. Let's see what kind of deal we can work out. Exact same thing, but Horus doesn't have that equivalent. He doesn't. He knows how politics like this work. He doesn't just storm in and kick over chairs and demand his way.
That's why he's the War Master, right?
That is why he's the War Master.
He's both Dorn and Malkador.
He is. I think it was really poignant in the beginning of Dan Abnett's book, number 20, No Fear. The opening lines of that is something to the effect of, it could only have ever been Horus or Gulliman. And I think this is a terrific highlight of why it definitely was not Dorn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, I'm done crapping on Dorn.
No, it's good. It's a great place. It's a great place to end, I think, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah. I think next week, listeners, if you're following along in your book 6, we'll be covering, I guess, False War to the Wrath of the Betrayed, right?
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. There will be no esoterica in this episode. Sorry for that, but Jason did pull out all the stops for the Solar Ox coverage. Let's be honest. It was a mess.
It was a lot of big ones.
It was a lot of big ones. There was a few gripes, but it was a lot of big ones. But yeah, no. I think, Dave, do you have anything else to add?
Just guys, if you're interested in going a little bit further down the rabbit hole, think about signing up for Patreon. I think our lowest tier is like $3 and get you access to a ton of stuff, but including some syllabus, show notes, and some questions that I think are thought-provoking, that as I'm sort of putting the show notes together with Pat and Jason, I'll think, hey, what does this really mean? And I'll sort of throw it out there as sort of a thought-provoking question. And you'll get those at least a week before, if not 2 weeks before everyone else gets the episode. And so, yeah. And then who knows? I would also love to say that if you really like Heresy Grad School, you don't have to become a Patreon. That's fine. But just send us a shout out on social media, right? Like Facebook or whatever, Instagram or whatever social media you do, and just say, hey man, I like it and want to see more of it and would love to, whatever you would like to see us cover next. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. Jason?
Let's see. I would like to call out a small plug for my buddy Ben Marsh and the Maryland 30K Bunch. If you listen to the main cast, you hear Ryan from that bunch of dudes all the time. Just got back from Ben's amazing Williamsburg muster a couple of weekends ago, and I appreciate him putting it together every year.
Those were some amazing scenarios and amazing games. And if any of our listeners in the, I guess, Central Virginia area have a chance to go to the muster or the Call to Arms. The Call to Arms happens in the fall, and the muster happens in the spring.
That sounds right.
Yeah. Ben does a fantastic job.
We got people from like the Carolinas to Pennsylvania, like coming in for that business, and it was well worth it.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I won Best Narrative, so that was kind of fun.
Absolutely. Your spooky Mechanicum.
Yep. Many people complained about the amount of thralls that I brought. I bring 50 thralls every single game.
It is a frustrating amount of thralls.
Yep. And they're gonna ruin your day.
Good times.
Yeah. But like Dave said, please give us a shout out, guys. We love hearing from you. I love seeing how many likes we get on whenever we post an episode. We love doing this stuff as much as you guys probably love hearing about this stuff. Which I hope is a lot, because if it isn't, then clearly we're not in the right game. But thank you all so much for listening, and that's it for us. Now, fuck off, Craig.
Beat it, Craig, you creeper.